In today's video, we're going to be reviewing a very popular set of gouache, so let's get started. Hey there, my name is Shivani and I'm a gouache artist and creative entrepreneur based in the sunny city of Chennai in the south of India. Through my channel, I teach you how to improve your skills as a gouache artist and as a creative business owner, so be sure to subscribe below so you don't miss any of the future videos. In today's video, we're reviewing the Miya Himi set of Jelly Gouache. I've got the set of 18 colors right here and it comes in a plastic box like this. I'm going to be trying Jelly Gouache for the first time. I usually work with Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache. Now, when it comes to the price of this gouache, this set is for 1100 Indian rupees roughly, and that is the cost of just 2 tubes of Winsor & Newton Designer's Gouache, and this is an 18 color set. Of course, this is a beginner level gouache and Winsor & Newton is a professional designer's gouache, so that definitely leads to a cost difference. But let's try it out. I'm really curious to see how it performs and whether it comes anywhere close to how this performs. These sets of gouache are easily available in India through Hindustan Trading Company, and you can use my discount code for 10% off. I'm also adding price lists on the screen for the gouache sets, both in India as well as in the US. So like I said, I've never used Jelly Gouache before and I haven't even opened this setup. It's still in the plastic covering that it came in. So we'll start right from the unboxing. I'm going to swatch out all the colors in this 18 color set, and I'll also try some color mixing and a small composition, and let's see how it performs. I'll let you know in the end of it whether I think it's worth investing in. Okay, so like I said, I've got the 18 color set of the Himi gouache. Each pan is about 30 ml of color. Let's go ahead and open this up first. First off, the box feels really nice. It's very heavy though, so if it's something you're considering taking for outdoor painting, you'll have to see if it's easy to carry for you. I'll go ahead and open that up. Also, this box comes in multiple different colors. Hindustan Trading Company was kind enough to sponsor this video and they sent me this box to try out. It also comes in a green cover, a blue cover, I think a yellow also. I'm not sure what all colors are being sold in India at the moment. Oh, this looks lovely. Okay, so looks like there is a palette sort of thing here for mixing your colors. And here we have the different tubs of gouache, which you can open up all of your colors and put them right in there. So I'm going to first go ahead and open all of them. When I tried opening this, I had a bit of a liquid come out. I guess that's some binder that's on the surface of the paint. The paint looks extremely creamy, definitely exciting to try it out. But yeah, I can see that there is some binder here on the surface, this glossy liquid that you see. It looks like it comes with 2 tubs of white, which is really useful because when you work with gouache, you do tend to use a lot more white than the other colors. Okay, so as you can tell from my fingers, I found some of them a little hard to open, especially this red, because when I started opening it, a bit kind of spilled over from the edge. But overall, the palette is looking gorgeous. Love the mix of colors. It's a lot more greens than I would probably use in my painting, but I'm not used to using an open pan of colors like this. When I use gouache, I normally buy Winsor & Newton Designer's gouache in tubes like this, and so I do use an airtight palette, which is very similar to what you're seeing here, where I squeeze out all my different Winsor & Newton colors onto this, and then I use them from here, which makes it very easy for me to travel with all my colors, and just it makes painting a lot easier and seamless because you don't have to squeeze them out from tubes every time. So I do see the merit of having your colors in a palette like this. There's a lot less friction when it comes to starting to paint. You can just open your palette and you're good to go. I am interested to see how this would hold up over time though, whether the colors would retain their freshness. For now, let me wash my hands and then we'll start swatching all of these colors. Okay, so my hands are all washed, and I'm going to just lay this palette here. So another thing to just be aware of, which isn't a deal breaker, but it's just something to know, is that the paints have a bit of a synthetic smell when you first open them up. So that's just something I wanted to point out so that you're aware of it. For some people, it may bother them, but overall, it's not really a deal breaker. I'm using Canson Montval paper for this demonstration. We're going to swatch out all the colors of paint. I'm first just laying out some black acrylic gouache. The reason I'm using acrylic gouache is that it will not reactivate when we apply paint over it. And the reason I'm putting a black line like this is so that we can paint all the swatches over it and see the opacity of the colors. So we'll just allow that to dry fully before we start swatching these colors. And if you're not aware of acrylic gouache, this is the brand I used, Turner Acryl Gouache. I did a whole video on acrylic gouache and how it's different from traditional gouache. You can watch it via the link above right here. So acrylic gouache is just like gouache in terms of its appearance. It'll have a matte appearance once it's dry, but it's like acrylic paints in the sense that it can't be reactivated with water once it's dry. Okay, so now that this base is dry, let's start swatching the colors. I'll start with the white. Paint is pretty thick and creamy. I'm going to just go ahead and swatch it as is so that we can see how thick it is. The white is reasonably opaque. It's quite nice and moves quite easily on the paper as well. I'm also trying to add some water to the paint to see how it looks. You can see right here that the yellow isn't that opaque. I didn't have too much water on my brush, but still it's not covering the black completely. So the yellow might need a couple of layers for it to look completely opaque. I can see that the paint does look pretty sticky because when I'm washing it off, it doesn't go off the brush as easily as I would have expected, which means that it probably has more binder as compared to a professional grade gouache. But that is to be expected from any student grade gouache. You expect it to have more binder than pigment, and even though these yellows are not very opaque in the sense that they're not covering the black as much as I would have hoped, but I will say that the pigments do look very vibrant and bright, which is nice. The yellow ochre, as you can see, is pretty thick. It's quite tough to pick it up, and I'm expecting it to be tough to move on the paper as well. Yeah, it is, but it's also a lot more opaque. those are all the colors swatched out. As you can tell, some colors are a lot more opaque than other colors, but that's true of any brand of gouache. Even with professional grade gouache, you will find that some pigments and some colors are more opaque than others. But overall, I'm pretty impressed with the quality of the pigments. The colors are pretty interesting. Let's try out a few more things and see how it goes. Okay, so I'm pulling out the palette which came within the lid, and I'm going to use that to mix some colors and try out a nice simple illustration here. I'm going to try a bit of color mixing first, and then I'll try to develop a simple illustration to see how this works out. I'm using a palette knife to take the colors from this so that I don't dip my brush into multiple colors. There are two reasons why I'm doing it. That one is I don't want to contaminate colors by accidentally putting my brush with some color on it into the wrong tub of paint. And secondly, by dipping a wet brush repeatedly into wet paint, it can develop mold over time, which is not something that I want. So let's first try mixing a simple pastel color. I really liked this color, so I'm going to take a bit of it. One thing I'll say about working with paints like this instead of them being in tubes is that it becomes a lot easier to take out exactly the amount of paint that you need. When you take it out from tubes, it often happens that you take out much more paint than what you need, and obviously you can't stuff it back into the tube. The lucky thing is that gouache can be reactivated on the palette, so I tend to just store paints on the palette whenever that happens, but that's one of the reasons I use a palette like this, so that I can prevent that as much as possible. The paint feels really nice and creamy on the brush. I'm just trying to bring it to the right consistency. I will say that it's a lot smoother, and I really like how I'm getting this creamy consistency. You can see it's not falling off the brush easily, but at the same time it's very easy to move around and pick up. So I love that it's reaching that consistency. It's a lot easier to use once you add a little water than the colors fresh from the tubs of paint. I did struggle while I was swatching them. Okay, so let's just paint that out. Looks like I didn't mix up enough paint, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to make that look intentional, and I'm going to leave these dry brush strokes on my paper because I love the look of that. By the way, not mixing up enough paint is a very common mistake that people make when they're working with gouache. If you want to know some of the common gouache mistakes and how to avoid them, click the link above to watch that video. I do like how this has turned out, and one thing I have to say is among the beginner brands that I've tried before, this is definitely one of the best. I can immediately tell from the way it's moving on the paper and the creaminess of the paint and how it doesn't feel gluggy on my brush. I've done a comparison before of some beginner brands which you can check out. Many of those I did find them to be really heavy on the brush while I was working with them. Okay, so now let's just paint a simple flower over this. I'm going a little wild with the colors today because I just want to try out different colors and see how the pigments are and how they're performing. So I'm taking out that opera pink kind of color. I'll take some white with it. Probably too much white, so I'll keep some aside. And I'm going to take a bit of this green because green is the complementary color of red, and it'll help dull the color out a little bit. In theory, at least. Let's see how it performs here. You see how it immediately dulled out the color once I added some green to it. I feel like maybe I added too much green, so I'm going to add a bit more pink back into that. paint a simple flower using this. The color is layering really well over the base, so I think that's really nice to see. So now I'm just going to mix up a nice green, maybe a mid-tone of green, and oops, dipped my paintbrush in there unintentionally. So I'll go back with the palette knife, take some green, a little bit of red. The same logic applies where I am mixing the complement of green, which is red, to deepen the color. So I think the paint also does go a pretty long way, which is nice compared to some of the other beginner gouache brands I've tried, where you do need to pick up a lot of the paint into your palette for you to be able to paint your illustration, compared to professional gouache where just a touch of the paint goes such a long way. I can tell that with this paint also just taking less is going a long way, which is nice to see. Also able to achieve delicate lines with this. Again, very nice to see, because with some of the beginner brands that I've tried, it's hard to achieve delicate lines, again because like I said, the paint ends up being pretty gluggy on the brush and really heavy to work with, so it makes it really hard. But with this I'm able to achieve delicate lines. It seems to be reactivating the base layer quite easily. So that's a bit of an issue, but not a big deal. You just need to learn how to keep your layers to the right consistency and control the paint, which will come with practice. The final thing I'm going to do is add some shading to the leaves and to the petals. Create lighter shades for each of them and then go ahead and put that into the painting. I find it really hard to control my brush when it's not moving towards me, which is why I tend to keep turning the paper in different directions. I apologize if that's difficult for you guys to see on the screen. The last thing I'm going to do is add some centers to the flowers. So I'm actually really happy with how this has turned out. I'm very impressed with the paints. I didn't think I was going to like it much at all. I will still say that it is more of a beginner grade paint. So if you're just starting off with gouache, I think this is a great set to get started with. If you don't want to invest too much, it comes with a good set of colors. It mixes well, it paints well. So all of that is great. Of course, there is a difference from using professional grade gouache, but I think as a beginner, this is a great starting point. I definitely would see myself, now that I have the set, I could use it for a few practice pieces and stuff like that. I would not use it for professional work because I'm not even sure how the light fastness is going to be. I'll have to keep it for some time and then let you know how that goes. I also am keen to see how the case holds up and whether the paints are drying out in the box. So that's something maybe I can create a video after a year and let you know the results. I'm trying to reactivate some dried paint on the palette and I think it's reactivating quite well. The paint isn't very creamy though once it's reactivated, I will say that. So maybe not the best for reactivating, but since they are pretty inexpensive, I would suggest just trying to mix as much as you need for your artwork and then wash off the rest from your palette and start fresh when you start a new painting session. I wouldn't recommend reactivating it on the palette because it doesn't seem to be reactivating as well as I would have hoped. So I hope that was helpful and I hope it helps you decide whether or not to purchase a gouache set like this for yourself. If you're curious to know the difference between expensive and budget gouache and how they compare against each other in terms of performance, be sure to check out this video right here next. Subscribe to the channel below and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thank you for watching. Bye.